Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. Today we are returning to Fallout 76, where we're going to spend another 1000 scrip on 3-star ranged legendary weapons. As always, I'll take a few moments to talk about what makes each weapon good, bad, or indifferent. Remember, if you enjoy content like this, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost you a penny. Alright, let's go on ahead and get started. So for our first ranged legendary weapon today, we get a Vampire's M79 grenade launcher with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and breaks 50% slower. So the Vampire's effect is a very good effect. It's most effective typically on weapons that have a fast fire rate, but it's also particularly good on explosive weapons and shotguns, because each time that the explosion or the pellets from shotguns hit a target, it triggers the Vampire's effect. So having a Vampire's effect on an explosive launcher weapon like the grenade launcher here is actually a pretty interesting role. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that's kind of iffy there. I'm not sure how many people would actually be using VATS with a grenade launcher like this. One of the drawbacks with doing so is that if you miss with a grenade launcher or other launcher type weapon in VATS, your projectile just kind of disappears, goes off into nothingness. You don't get an explosion anywhere near it or anything like that. That said, it could still be useful potentially depending on your playstyle. So if you are the type of player who would use something like this in VATS, then that could be very good because of its high base damage. Having it break 50% slower, that's also a great effect on pretty much any weapon because, well, nobody likes repairing their weapons. So having that on a weapon like this is a great thing. It's not as great as it used to be because explosive weapons such as launcher weapons and even weapons with just the explosive bullets legendary effect used to break much quicker, but they've more or less resolved that issue. So even so, the breaking 50% slower is still a good effect. So this is pretty mediocre, but could be interesting if you wanted to carry it around to use up your 40mm grenades when you find them instead of just dropping them. But I don't think too many people are going to be using a grenade launcher as their running around weapon. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And this time we got a Suppressor's Bow with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 250 damage resistance while reloading. So the Suppressor's effect, it is not one of my favorite effects. There's just not really a lot of cause, in my opinion, for that effect. Most enemies don't hit that hard, and most enemies go down quick enough that you just don't really need it. I could see it potentially having some use in the Decryption Daily Ops events, because those enemies do hit hard, and being able to reduce the damage that they do could potentially be useful. That said, I'm not sure that a bow is the best weapon for that, although since it is stealth-based, and the bow is silent, that's certainly an option that could be explored. The second effect, plus 50% VATS hit chance, that could be very good on a weapon like this because you really want to make sure that your shots hit and you really want them to hit the weak points because the bow is going to fire relatively slow. So you really want to put things down in one shot whenever possible. So aiming for the weak points really helps with that, and having the plus 50% VATS hit chance, well, that makes hitting those weak points a whole lot easier. Plus, it actually helps out with additional range for the weapon because it cancels out some of the range accuracy drop-off past the range on the card, and bows actually have some of the best range in the game, surprisingly, so that could actually be very good on this weapon. The plus 250 damage resistance while reloading, that could actually be good on this weapon just because you're going to be reloading between every shot, so it's going to come up a lot. That said, I'm not a big fan of that effect just because when you get armor that has a combined damage resistance of about 350 to 400 or a little higher than that, then you're going to start seeing diminishing returns on how much damage is going to be stopped based on your damage resistance. So adding another 250 on top of that, it's not going to do nothing. It will definitely help. It's just not going to help nearly as much as if you were sitting at 0 defense and then it added 250 to nothing. That would be a huge difference. So Overall, I'm not a big fan of the third effect. I'm not really a big fan of the bow, but if you are a bow user, you're probably still not that interested in this one just because the first and third stars are not particularly good. So let's move on to the next one. And here we have an Executioner's Plasma Caster with 25% faster fire rate and 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Executioner's effect is actually one of the few, actually it may be the only effect that's still multiplicative in the game, meaning that that extra 50% damage when the target is below 40% health is actually 50% of the damage that shows on your card, assuming you've got perks or other effects increasing it from the base damage. So that's a good thing. Unfortunately, this weapon hits pretty hard and is usually going to take things down in 1 to 2 shots anyway, so you're not going to see a lot of benefit from that effect, except on larger enemies such as behemoths, Mirelurk Queens, and of course the endgame bosses such as the Scorchbeast Queen, Earl, or the Imposter Sheepsquatch. So for those fights, I could definitely see this being a useful weapon, but outside of that, you could probably do much better on your first legendary star. The second effect is actually one of the best effects for certain weapons. Unfortunately, this weapon is not one of the best weapons for that effect. A semi-automatic weapon will generally fire as quickly as you can pull the trigger. The 25% faster fire rate really doesn't allow you to be able to pull the trigger faster, so it really is a lost effect on a weapon like this that you cannot modify to be fully automatic. The plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, this could actually be very good on a weapon like this, although this is one of the few heavy guns that you could potentially use in VATS pretty effectively. So if you're doing that, then that effect is doing nothing for you. But if you're not, then there's a good chance you will be aiming, and getting some extra damage resistance while you're aiming is never a bad thing, although there's a good chance you'd be wearing power armor, and the damage resistance that it provides is going to be well beyond the diminishing returns point, so it's kind of questionable how much benefit you'll actually get out of that. But anyway, let's move on to the next one. And here we have a Furious Short Handmade with bullets explode for area damage and faster movement speed while aiming. So this is an interesting weapon. The Furious effect can be pretty good on weapons that have a fast fire rate, which of course the Handmade can definitely be modified to have an automatic receiver and be fully automatic. So you can definitely benefit from the Furious effect. Explosive effects the bolts exploding for area damage is one of the best second stars in the game. And it just basically adds extra damage, but it also can add extra damage to other targets. There is some concern about the Furious effect and the bullets exploding for area damage not working well together, because you have to target the same target with Furious for its damage to increase. In case you're not familiar, the Furious effect's damage increases by 5% per shot on the same target. So the first shot does 0 extra damage, the second shot does 5% more, the third shot does 10% more, and so on until you get up to, it's either 45 or 50%. I don't remember for sure which. So that's a good thing on a fully automatic weapon, but the bullets exploding, they do actually hit other limbs and other body parts on your target. I've tested this out, and the Furious effect does still seem to work as long as the explosive damage is not splashing over onto a second target. If it does that, then it does reset the Furious. So that's something to be aware of with a weapon like this. But overall, this is still a good weapon. The third star is not doing much for you. If you have the Speed Demon mutation, then it's doing nothing at all. And even if you don't, then how much moving are you really doing when you're aiming? Typically, you're aiming, killing something, and then stopping aiming and moving on. At least that's the way I play typically. So overall, this is a pretty good one, but not a god roll by any means. So let's move on and see what else we get. Alright, this time we got a Ghoul Slayer's Black Powder Rifle with replenishing action points with each kill and 25% less VATS AP cost. So the Slayer's effects, such as the Ghoul Slayer's effect, are a varying use. The Ghoul Slayer's effect is probably one of the less useful ones, simply because ghouls are so easy to kill that you can run around and kill them pretty easily with the non-legendary weapons. So the plus 50% damage to ghouls legendary effect is not really doing a whole lot for you. It can be useful because sometimes ghouls can be useful for grinding as well as super mutants, such as the golf club or I believe it's the Charleston Capitol building is the other one that people frequently go to. But anyway, moving on to the replenishing action points with each kill, that could be very useful, but is probably not so useful on a weapon like this because you're typically going to have lots of time to replenish your action points between shots because of how long it takes to reload. So that's probably not doing as much for you as it could be on a much faster firing weapon, even if it was just a semi-automatic faster firing weapon. The 25% less VATS AP cost, again, it's a very good effect, but it's probably a bit lost on this weapon just because it takes so long to fire that as long as you drop out of VATS between shots, your AP is regenerating that whole time, so it's questionable how much use you're really going to get out of that. Overall, I'd call this one a dud. Let's move on to the next one. And here we've got an Executioner short plasma pistol with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and breaking 50% slower. So we talked about the Executioner's effect earlier, but this one it's a little bit more interesting on because it doesn't hit quite as hard as the Plasma Caster. So you could see more situations where you're going to get some benefit out of that extra damage when they're below 40% health, where it would take more than just one more shot to kill them. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that is a great effect. It turns out that the VATS critical damage on the endgame bosses, such as the Scorch Beast Queen and Earl, it bypasses their 70% and whatever damage reduction that they have right off the top. So that is a huge effect and could make this weapon very good for fighting the Scorch Beast Queen or Earl. Having it break 50% slower, that's a great effect on every weapon, and if you modify this one out to be fully automatic, it's going to be even better because of how quickly it's firing. Would normally break down much quicker than it would with that effect. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. This one's pretty good. And here we've got a Mutant Slayer short Gatling gun with plus 25% damage while aiming and 90% reduced weight. So the Mutant Slayer's effect is actually one of the more useful Slayer's effects because you are frequently going to be hunting down super mutants just because they're good XP. There's also the daily ops that feature super mutants. So those are two situations where you're likely to be hunting super mutants and fighting super mutants intentionally, and when you know you're going to be doing it. The 25% damage while aiming, that's a great effect for heavy guns because in most cases you're going to be using aiming or just hip firing as opposed to VATS. So getting an extra 25% damage just for aiming down the sights, that's a good effect. And the 90% reduced weight, that is especially good on heavy guns, partly because they're so heavy, but also partly because, unlike other weapons, they typically have fewer mods available to them, which means that you're going to see more benefit from that 90% reduced weight because the mods that you put on your weapons do not benefit from the 90% reduced weight legendary effect. So overall, this one's pretty good. Not great, but definitely not a bad weapon at all. So let's move on to the next one. And here we have a Gormand's auto grenade launcher, with the last round in the magazine has a 25% chance to deal double damage and 90% reduced weight. So the Gormand's effect is not one of my favorites. It's 24% damage when bonus damage when both your health and your thirst meters are at 100% full. That's not a lot of extra damage, especially when compared to things like aristocrats or junkies that are both plus 50%. The additional drawback is that over time, both of your hunger and thirst meters are going to deplete, and your damage from that is going to deplete as well. Sure, you can use perfect bubblegum to stall that, or bubblegum just in general, but to some extent, you're going to see some reduction in damage because of that. So overall, it's not one of my favorite first effects. The last round in the magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage, I consider that effect totally worthless. The having only 25% chance on that last hit to deal double damage is way too low. It needs to be much higher than that for it to have any chance of being useful at all. Besides that, on many weapons, you're going to be performing tactical reloads, which means you're going to reload whenever there's a lull in the fighting so that you're at a full clip at the next time the fighting starts. In that case, you're not even going to be firing the last round, and so you'll never see the benefit from that. So overall, it's like not having a secondary effect at all, in my opinion. The 90% reduced weight on heavy guns is very good. I talked about that on the last weapon, so I'm not going to beat that into the ground, but it's very good on a weapon like this. So overall, this one is pretty mediocre. Let's take a look at what we get next. And here we've got a Stalker single action revolver with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, and your VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. So the Stalker's effect, in theory, it could be good for sniper weapons that are silenced and allow you to stay out of combat, but in practice, the effect doesn't seem to do anything at all. So overall, it's almost like not having a legendary effect in the first star. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that's a great effect. I talked about that earlier. Everything I said there should apply here. And it's also worth noting that if you're running a pistol build that's running gunslinger as opposed to guerrilla, meaning semi-automatic instead of fully automatic, then you're probably going to be wanting VATS criticals to help increase your damage. So having that effect on a weapon like this is very useful. And having your VATS critical meter filling 15% faster, well, that just means you get more VATS criticals, and that's always a good thing if you're trying to do that. So this weapon is not exciting, but I could see a lower level player who hadn't built up a supply of good weapons yet using it as their main until they got something better. So let's see what we get for our last one here. And here we got an Instigating Crusader pistol with replenishing action points with each kill and plus 250 damage resistance while reloading. So this one's kind of interesting. Its damage is a bit low, and the instigating effect, it's a lie. It's not really doing double damage that you see on your card, assuming that you've used any perks or any other effects to boost that damage. It's actually double the base damage of the weapon. So it could still be good on some weapons, but generally the weapon needs to have a very high base damage to get the most out of that. So this weapon does not have a very high base damage, so you're not going to get as much benefit out of it as you would, say, a Gauss rifle or a hunting rifle or something like that. Having it replenish action points with each kill, that could be a good thing because you're probably going to spend quite a few shots bringing things down with a weapon like this. And if you're using VATS, then you're going to be burning up a lot of AP doing so. So getting some of that AP back when you kill something, that's going to be a good thing and help you keep fighting. The 250 damage resistance while reloading, just as I mentioned previously in the video, it's a good effect. This weapon doesn't have an especially large clip, but it's not especially small either. So you will be reloading it fairly frequently, but it's a relatively quick reload as well. So overall, I don't think you're going to see a lot of benefit out of that 250 damage resistance while reloading on a weapon like this, but at least it's doing something for you. So overall, this weapon is decent, not amazing. So didn't get anything too great today, but we'll try again next week. I appreciate you all joining me, and I'll talk to you next time.